From sports to politics and back again. That's the evolution of Keith Olbermann's career. Olbermann's comfortable on either stage, currently back in the employ of ESPN, where he first made his mark some 30 years ago. Keith Olbermann is our guest on this edition of After Hours. Keith Olbermann is at home in New York City. Louie DeBrusk remains in Edmonton. And today we're pleased to announce Keith Olbermann's appointment as Chief American Correspondent for a program After Hours. Clearly a career highlight. And there is Keith nattily attired in a version of Vancouver Canucks outerwear. What is that version, Keith?
This would be not this past season's, but the year before's, what was it, the New Year's practice sweater.
Chinese New Year
game. Yeah, Chinese New Year game, which is I can turn it around a little bit here, and you can guess here. You can read the start of the name anyway. Yeah,
Patterson.
Yeah, so I figured this would probably be more interest to you and the audience than wearing the shirt of my sort of like number one team as opposed to 1A, which would be a Rangers shirt, which is inside. I left it inside.
Okay, well, we're going to get to your attachment to the Vancouver Canucks later. But first, because your career, Keith, goes well beyond sports, we'll start with the same question that we've asked in the last two episodes of After Hours. Are you hopeful with what's going on in the world right now and in the U.S., all stemming from the killing of George Floyd, that we are at the beginning of the end of systemic racism?
Yeah, I do think this is a sea change moment, not unlike the 60s. And the history turns on such strange things that we have not had sports or entertainment, and that we have, to some degree, almost everybody has been at home more with less to do and more time to think and more time to see things for what they really are. This pause in our society has given us time to think about this, and particularly the graphicness of the George Floyd video, combined with this sort of hole in our lives, affected people in a visceral way that I don't know that we've ever seen before. I've seen this throughout my life and seen it wax and wane, and seen people's awareness of it wax and wane. But I think it really has hit home, and I certainly hope so, because it's been one of the blights on everybody. You see it sort of as a sort of white guy in America, you wouldn't think it would ever affect you, but now you go through the times that it actually has, and it's been deleterious to all of us, not just the people who are the obvious victims, but the people who are standing by and either can't do anything or are sort of ancillary victims to it. So I think we've made a big step in the U.S. and hopefully it carries through. There will always be forces working against it. And there'll be forces of benign neglect and people who don't understand why things are the way they are. My own father on his deathbed told me about, and he was an arch liberal. He made me look somewhat conservative. My father saw Satchel Paige pitch for the New York Black Yankees. That was the name of the team at Yankee Stadium in 1941. And in the hospital, as he was fighting very valiantly, but didn't make it from his last illness, he said it never occurred to him that, and this is 1941, and he was a liberal kid at the age of 12, never occurred to him until much later that the black players did not want to only play with other black players, just like the white players only wanted to play with other white players. He didn't understand that this was not a voluntary thing. And 68 years later, he said he felt such unbelievable shame about that emotion. I said, give yourself a break. You were a 12-year-old kid in 1941. He goes, no, he said, giving yourself a break on that is how this happens. And he's absolutely right. It's not just people who view other people as somehow lesser because of what they look like or how they talk or whatever else there is involved in it. It's the people who don't understand that is oppression, and who think because they have not perhaps done it themselves, it's nothing to do with them.
Keith, it seems that people now are trying harder to understand Colin Kaepernick's peaceful protest that essentially lost him his football career.
Yeah.
How do you think he should be remembered through all this?
Well, I'd like to see him remembered whenever the NFL plays again. If it's this year or later, I'd like to see him remembered as at least a backup quarterback in the NFL, starting with the 2021 or 2020 seasons, if we have one. I think that'd be the first step, because his presence in the NFL, if he doesn't, if he plays like the average NFL quarterback and gets about 20 snaps in a full season, his presence on the sidelines will be an automatic reason for us to remember what he went through and what the nature of his protest was, and our, as a society's reaction to it. I think that'd be the first step. There's nothing, if you think about the American Olympians in 1968 who protested on the medal stand in Mexico City, their careers ended and they were always viewed as, well, that happened then. It was a way of sort of dismissing it and thinking it's all over. And the thing about Colin Kaepernick, were he to play again, would be that you would be reminded that it's not all over until it is fully removed from society, and it's it's ongoing struggle, and it still can be lost. So that's the way I'd like him to be remembered, by saying, yeah, oh, Kaepernick, he's over here, he's taking snaps right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, Keith, let's get to the proposed restarts of professional sports. You made clear in a tweet a couple of days ago that you're not in favor of any of them. In fact, decidedly against. Why?
Well, I think not in favor might be a little strong, Scott. I hope that everything I've ever said about these things turns out to be wildly stupid and inaccurate. I'd like nothing better than to be sitting back and watching, you guys bring me a Canucks game or anything else. Or if you guys want to go and do a Mets Philadelphia Phillies game, I'm happy to watch you do that too. Or if I have to go and do one of those games, that's great as well. My fear is what we've seen in the last couple of days out of Florida, that, there is a conviction in the hearts and minds of many people who are making important decisions about this, that it will go away, that there will be no more Rudy Gobert moments. And I think Friday we had a bunch of Rudy Gobert moments in the training camps of the Phillies and the Blue Jays, and the camp of reportedly anyway, of the Tampa Bay Lightning. You're just not going to be able to stop a virus that we don't have control over just because it's hot out. And my concern is that, particularly for baseball, they will have spent this summer, the owners and the players, but particularly the owners, beating each other over the head over money and who's going to do this and who's taking this liability and how is this going to turn out. And the answer is going to be, there's not going to be a season anyway, and the only thing we're going to remember is the arguing. As to the NHL, at this point, I don't think this is feasible. I think this might be popular in some quarters. I think the Canadian teams ought to just proceed without the American teams. Just say, look, we have this under control. When the U.S. gets it under control in all quarters, not just in New York or the Northeast or California, where there is a semblance that we have our hand around the beast's neck, but everywhere, until the U.S. is ready, you guys are all suspended for the duration. Just let the 7 Canadian teams play, and we'll watch. I don't think this would be extraordinarily popular in most U.S. cities, but it's the only realistic thing at this point. You just can't have a scenario in which an out of control virus is just going to be wished into the cornfield, to use an old Twilight Zone punchline. That's not the way this works. And I'm very fearful that we're going to, the worst case scenario is obviously somebody gets sick, really sick. But the second worst case scenario is you do this restart, you put people in whatever kind of bubble they're going to have at the full, we're all going to live at Disney for the NBA, or we're going to do this for the NHL, we're going to do that for the Major League Baseball season. And then we have to call it off. I mean, we don't want to go through 1919 and the Stanley Cup Finals and the Seattle Metropolitans and the Canadiens again. We certainly don't want anything that serious. And that's my fear. It's that we start this in any one of these sports and we can't finish it. And God forbid it's somebody getting really sick or worse.
You touched on baseball a little bit. I want to follow up with that a little bit. The NHL and NBA seem to have a systematic approach to how they want to come back. Yeah. It seems organized, whereas you look over at Major League Baseball right now, and it's a little bit of a fiasco. What's your take on that, and why is that?
Well, I don't want to pin this all on one man, because the commissioner of any sport there's two things true about commissioners of all sports. One is they are the employees of the owners, and they're not making these decisions in a vacuum. They're doing them on behalf of the owners. And also the other thing that's true about almost all commissioners of sports is that they went to my college, Cornell University. So I could tell you a little bit about why I think baseball is in a bit of a disarray. Rob Manfred was a year behind me at Cornell, and he was at the very good labor college there. And one of the things that they taught, even though it was not the most popular subject, but there were courses taught at that school, I took one of them, which were about how to take advantage of dire situations and how to make, there's always an opportunity to make or save a little money no matter what happens. And I think the owners are still in this sort of mindset, since none of them have ever been owners in a time in baseball in which, there was widespread financial loss or even any real risk of being possibly losing money, never mind going out of business or not having 40,000 fans per game. The owners in baseball in particular, they don't know that world where a team has to move because they got 7,000 fans a game to attend. And they just saw this as, well, let's reassure ourselves here of all the profits we can, and we'll slough off all the responsibility, both in terms of physical risk and financial risk, on the players. And you can't do that. It's a state of emergency, and one of the things you have to put away in a state of emergency is increasing your profits. I'm not against anybody making money. I am a capitalist through and through. I like being paid money, and I like being overpaid. But I don't think that at this time that should be the primary motivator. And I think with baseball, it's been that, and the results are what we're seeing.
All right, let's get to hockey, Keith. You've been a fan since you were 7 or 8 years of age, and of all the promos that you were part of in the old days of ESPN, I'm wondering how much this one meant to you. Let's watch.
In the old days, we had respect for some. Yeah, Bobby Hall hit me one time right here. You're not listening. They have the advantage because they can put you in a corner here like this. You're in there digging in real tight. You do this, and you get their attention. If you don't like him again, it's up here. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? The follow-through's like this. When the puck dropped, I hit him here. It was a respectful game when we played it. See, Mummy.
That's great.
So there you were, selling the game with Mr. Hockey, one of the most revered players in the game, and I don't think he really had to act when it came to the elbows.
I will tell you this. Every one of those shots that he took at me, he did not connect. When you say that, I'm going to contradict you. He was a superb physical actor, because that stuff that looked like an elbow under my chin and such had the essential force of one of my dogs here putting his paw in my palm. Gordy was brilliant doing that stuff, and that's all, with the exception of a couple of the lines that they wanted him to use, that's all ad-libbed. I don't know if he was taking out any personal revenge against me. I don't think so. But the best parts of that are as follows. That's my actual desk. We shot all of that in about half an hour. My entire acting responsibility in that was to try to not crack up while he did this to me and just sort of ignore it. And the last part was, I said to him, I know, as we were setting up the lights, I said, I know you can't possibly remember any of the details, but we met when I was a kid at the New York Auto Show and I said, I think it's 1969 or maybe it was 1970. And he said, oh, wait a minute, Byron Nelson and Jesse Owens and I signing autographs? And I went, yes. And I said, and you signed my card and then handed it back to me. And when I reached for it, you dropped your hand like that. And my hand is up here. And I don't know how you did this magic trick. You go, oh, yes, the hand. And he repeated what he'd done with me 26 years before. And then he said, no, wait a minute. He said, that was the late season snow that year. And I said, hey, you're right. He said, how did you get to the New York Coliseum? Because we were in Boston. And we couldn't fly. We had to take the train down. I just scored 2 goals against the Bruins and against Cheevers. No, I'm sorry, it was Johnston. I always shot low on Eddie first because he was convinced I was a high shooter. So I beat him once in the first period and then came back in the third with another one. Now, when we got to New York, some of the Rangers were stuck out on their homes in the island, and they were talking about maybe Emil Francis was going to have to be the backup goalie. And I'm sitting here going, he's rolling back a 3-day period from 1970, minute by minute, and it underscores the thing that I've always argued, which is that the greatest component of an athlete that you don't really think of is memory. He remembered everything, and he was such a pleasure to work with under those circumstances. And of course, it's Gordie Howe, and I was as mesmerized by his presence in 1995 or 6 when we shot that as I was when I met him in 1970. He's, as you know, every story about how great he was and how great he was with people and how funny and calm and just in the moment he was, they're all, if anything, understatements of how great that man was, let alone that player was.
Mr. Hockey.
Yeah.
All right,
Man,
Sharks
let me add
Blues.
one thing, Scott.
Sure.
And then, as I said, even though he hit, what you see is me getting basically my arm severed here by a karate chop. He's hitting like this. About half an hour after we did that, he left. He turned a little off. They took all the cameras and the lights down, and I started to write my script for SportsCenter that night. And that's when I stopped having feeling in this arm, because even though he was pulling the punches, there was still something so strong about them that there was nerve damage for several weeks. So I just wanted to throw that in too.
Okay, Sharks Blues Game 3 conference final last year. The officials missed Timo Meier's Glover hand pass, and it's there for Erik Karlsson to score the winning goal in overtime, and the Sharks take the series lead. Your hot take via Twitter was one of outrage about the officiating. I think you said something to the effect of, when the rules don't start covering reality, then I am out. Did you stay through to the end of the Stanley Cup final?
Yes, I did, because Twitter is a place for you to express your own outrage and nonsense in the moment. And if you take it more seriously than that on subjects like sports, there's going to be trouble. But, there are egregious moments where you just can't let things like that stand. And I think it's useful to encourage the referees to do a better job and the league in reviewing the referees than they have, in the last, recently. When I say recently, since 1917, 18. Their refereeing has been a little inconsistent, like the umpiring is in baseball and the officiating is in the NBA and the NFL. A little inconsistent.
Keith, you said also in this tweet after established your credentials that you broke the Gretzky trade.
Yes.
Take us back in hockey history to arguably the biggest story ever in hockey.
Well, I'll tell you, Louie, this was not only was it the biggest story, and it's probably the biggest story I ever was involved in, and several people kind of simultaneously in different venues who did not know they were each very close on this story, all had about the different details of the same story at the same time. This is the story I did the least amount of work on in my life. I have worked 12, 14 hours on the phone trying to get information on a story, and then it's like a 1 minute, little detail nobody cares about. I staked out Rocket Ismail when he was signing with the Toronto Argos as he was leaving the Forum in LA, and the cameraman forgot to roll as we got him, and I had him exclusively expressing the fact that he had signed with the Argos on the eve of the NFL draft, and there's no videotape of it because the cameraman forgot to hit play and record, which would seem to be the first part of being a cameraman, is to hit play and record. This one I did nothing on. I came back from my radio assignment in the afternoon to this television station that I was leaving in 2 weeks because I was being traded too. And phone calls started to come in on the afternoon of when I guess August 8th, Monday would have been the 7th, whatever it was, the Monday of that week. The phone calls started coming in about 6 o'clock. Bruce McNall had done a tour of LA golf courses. And everywhere he went, he said, "Hey, you better buy some Kings tickets now. I'm trading for Gretzky." And then he'd go to another course. Then he went out to Riviera. And now the phone is basically, "There's another call for you." And it's like, "Hello, hi, I'm a viewer. I just wanted to tell you." And I'm thinking, I might be being played by that son of a gun who does sports on Channel 4. He may be setting me up here. But the final call I got was from a viewer who was on a conference call with his ex-wife, who was the person in the financial office of the LA Kings, the only one in the financial office who did not go to jail ultimately. She was the one who actually did the math in those pre-calculator days. She wrote the checks and everything else. And this fellow says, "Honey, tell him what you told me." And she said, "I'm sitting here with a contract form that's filled out with the names Carson and Gingras and whoever else was in it, and a fellow named Gretzky. And I've got a check here made out to Peter Pocklington that has a whole lot of zeros on it. And I just countersigned it." And I thought to myself, gee, I wonder if this is a good enough source to go with this story now. And I called her back through the King switchboard, and it was her. And I thought, okay, well, that's an easy story. So in those days, again, this is like dinner time in LA, and this held, as we say, until 10 o'clock Pacific time. I thought for sure somebody else would have it with better sources, somebody who was working on it. And there were a couple of reports here and there because McNall, people who saw McNall did not just call the local sportscasters, they called people throughout Canada and said, what the hell's going on here? But that night we led the newscast with this story, and the Associated Press took my script and put it out on the Associated Press wire, like word for word. So my sportscast from Monday night in LA was on the back page of the New York Post on Tuesday morning. I still have that framed because it's just a funny thing to look at. But that's it. I did nothing worthwhile on this, and the Kings initially denied it, and I was told by my source at the Kings that the reason they weren't going to confirm it was that the Oilers' deadline for returning season ticket deposits was Thursday. So they were trying to hold out till Thursday so that nobody could. And when the news conference, so here's the punchline of that. So the news conference takes place then hurriedly because, as you know, that day of mourning in Canada that next day, which we carried that live, and then carried much of Gretzky's press conference live in LA that night. But I went to it, and they gave me, I thought it was a very nice move by the Kings. They let me interview Gretzky. They gave him to me first for the live shot. And Roy Malacher, who was the vice president of the team at that point, said, we ought to send you a bill too, because this got out from us, obviously, it cost the Oilers like another $150,000, $200,000 in refunds on their season tickets. So we had to, so that whatever the correct figure is on that, the amount of money they gave the Oilers, there's an extra $150,000 or $200,000 that they had to pay to them as a bonus, because Pocklington says, I'm not signing this unless you give me the extra $150,000 that you cost me because McNall couldn't keep his bleeping mouth shut, which is exactly how the story came to pass. That's basically the whole tale.
You and the Canucks. Louie has the question.
Well, obviously you follow the Canucks. You're wearing a jersey right now with the Vancouver Canucks. Explain how you became an accidental fan of that team.
Well, that's Scott's fault. I mean, you should remember this story, Scott, for God's sakes. This is that I can say, among other things, historically, is I saw a Canucks game in their first year here at I saw the first Vancouver Canucks at New York Rangers game. Yes, that's true. That's the one I'm wearing. It was a little small then. It's a lot smaller now. It was a lovely gesture from Mr. Beauvais. But originally, at the time of this video that you're looking at from my ESPN2 show from 2014, this was during Sestito Gate, when I called Tom Sestito a boxing hobo on skates, which apparently he loved enough to quote it, because he had that one game where he played a minute and had 4,000 minutes in penalties or whatever it was. And I just thought it was funny and made a lot of fun of it on ESPN2. And he was fine with it, but his younger sister went nuts, which is great. Good for her for defending him. So there was a little rancor between me and the Canucks and Canucks fans. And then I started to watch, my schedule changed, and I started to watch a lot of NHL games at 10 o'clock every night. And I started to watch the Canucks as a sort of primary choice, because I really liked John Shorthouse's play-by-play. And this is obviously before I got to know him, because once you get to know him, you go, oh my God, he's 12 years old. But there came the occasion when you, Scott, put out a tweet asking for people to submit questions. Who was it who was contagious? Who was it who was contagious?
We had Alex Burrows on that night, I think, and the question question was about the mumps, right?
Right, he had the mumps, and you solicited questions on Twitter, and I said, why don't you, I'll ask a question. Are you sure you're not contagious? Asking for a friend, and you got a hold of me on Twitter and said, would you put that on video? And I did, and I said, is Shorthouse doing the game? Would you please tell him I'm a big fan? Well, that got back to him, and I got an email from John, and it was addressed to Mr. Olbermann. And he was a fan of mine when he was a studio guy in Vancouver. And we struck it up from there, including him confessing that he used to steal video and my jokes from SportsCenter at 11 o'clock Eastern time and put them on his sportscast a little later Pacific time when he was a studio guy. And John and I just have the same sense of humor. So, but I truly think he's one of the finest play-by-play men in any sport. And it just made the experience people are drawn to different teams for different reasons. And I think enjoying broadcast, I'm a fan of the San Francisco Giants, not particularly because they have any real connection to me, nor have I ever seen a game in their ballpark in San Francisco. But the games are so entertaining and so welcoming. And I find the same thing with Shorthouse and Garrett, and they come and visit. And as you saw from that clip there, John made the mistake of having me join him for a period, and I did my impression of him on the air, standing next to him. And it was just, again, but it underscores the one thing, and this is the root of my connection to the Canucks. It underscores the reality that, you know, you can be a frozen adolescent and still be a brilliantly successful play-by-play man in any sport. And I should add, I'm particularly, he's a virtuoso. He's sort of a genius in that way, because I don't know that was his original career goal, but that was my original career goal. That's what I was going to do. First thing I ever actively tried to do in professional broadcasting, or my first aspiration anyway, was being a hockey play-by-play man in high school. And I never got close to it for a variety of functions, including the one that I don't think I was really that good at it. So John is like Mozart. You know, he's likely to do a brilliant play-by-play and then, you know, let out some sort of burp or other gaseous emission. And you just sit there going, I worked my whole life to try to do this, and this guy is 10 times better than I am. But yeah, so we have fun, and it's a good fun team. The good fun team, always a good house, and the time it's the right time for me. I can watch at 10 o'clock at night Eastern time.
Play-by-play, you have to love the game to do it well, and John does. I mean, I tried it, and it became quickly apparent that if there was more than one person in the field to play, I was done. So it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah,
Keith, you're enjoying a successful career that now has spanned 40 years. That's included informed sports and political commentary, impactful commentary, in places almost too numerous to count. CNN, ESPN, ESPN2, MSNBC, Fox Sportsnet, Current TV, ABC Radio Network, and 147 episodes of The Resistance. About the only thing missing is InfoWars with Alex Jones.
Oh, thank God.
Would you... we're going to run out of time here, so quickly, if you could, how would you describe your career?
I've never had to work anywhere any longer than I wanted to. That's CNN in 1981, and that's Boston, where they told me to stop making jokes. LA, where they paid me a lot of money. Here's SportsCenter, where I didn't realize those glasses made me look 80. Now with new glasses and no mustache, where I look 20. This is ESPN the third time, and this is when Dan Patrick and I did a reunion last September, which was a great deal of fun. I came from this background. At 38, my father quit a job as an architect at a pretty good firm here in New York and went out on his own. At 38, his father quit a job in the middle of the Depression with the city of New York because he didn't like having to wear a shirt and tie. He wanted to wear an open-neck shirt. There's something about it genetically that is in play, so that when I was 38, I quit SportsCenter and went out and tried this combination of sports and news the first time at MSNBC. But years and years ago, I was debating whether or not to leave my first job in radio, where I worked for Sam Rosen, incidentally, the voice of the Rangers. He was my first boss and survived to tell that story. But I'd been offered a new job at a radio network that had only existed for a year, and I asked my father what he thought. He said, let me see if I remember this. You got this UPI job. You were offered another job before that you turned down. And I said, yes. He said, now you've been offered this new job. That's 3. I said, yes. He said, wasn't there another radio job in Boston? I said, yeah. He said, so that's 4 jobs. So if this new one doesn't work out, you think you're never going to be offered another job in your life? You think this is it? Are you good at all at what you do, or do you stink? I said, no, I think I'm good. He said, so why would you worry about going somewhere new? He said, that's the reason I never went to work for anybody particular again. It was too boring to be in one place forever. He said, it's good for some people, but I think you'll find that genetically it isn't any good for you. And he was absolutely right. So all these changes have usually been something that I have either welcomed or made happen. And usually it results in me getting more money too. So it's staying in one place and doing one thing is, I stand up and applaud, and anybody who can do it and enjoy it, I'm glad. It's not for me, And yet, on the other hand, the last time I was at MSNBC, it went on for 8 years. And I talked to them about going back there about 5 years ago. And they said, well, we need to have assurance that you'll be here for a while this time. And I said, all right, whatever it is you want that reassures you. But I will need assurance that you intend to keep me here for a while. So I'll need an 8-year contract. And they didn't think that was funny for some reason. So, you know, it's peripatetic. I'm all over the place. I don't like to keep doing exactly the same thing. I do get bored easily. And I don't, you know, if somebody says do this and I think it's morally incorrect or something I don't feel comfortable doing, that's usually the bone of contention. I just say, you know, bye, I'll go over here now. And for 41 years, I've been able to keep doing that. So what the heck? I mean, you know, so what if I worked at ESPN 5 different times? There are plenty of guys who, you know, how many times was Brian Watson owned by Montreal? I mean, these things do happen.
All right, Louie's got a question involving the person that we have to assume is your favorite author.
And it's James Thurber, Keith. And a quote from him, I'd like to see your reaction from this and talk about it. The quote is, "Let us not look back in anger, nor forward in fear, but around in awareness."
Yes.
No better time for a quote like this that he said so many years ago that it seems so fitting for now.
Yeah, you can find almost any given condition in life has been described at some point by the works of James Thurber or the drawings of James Thurber. Yeah, it's so many people are, particularly in these days, apropos of this one quote, people don't look around. They are entrenched in previous positions. This applies to what we were just talking about. If the job isn't any good, if it's no longer satisfying you, get a different job. If the position you have taken or the thing you have supported no longer is valid in your mind, take a different position. Adjust to the reality around you. One of the few positives of the last 3 or 4 months is, as we began this conversation, gentlemen, was that we've all had time to reflect on whether or not we've been right about certain important things, or we have been, you know, not giving them sufficient priority and prioritization. And now we've had a pause in all the workaday, not trivia, but the workaday essentials that aren't there at the moment. So Thurber's quote really does fit. It's just look around and see the world for what it is and where you fit into it and what has changed since the last time you gave yourself kind of a social health exam. And I think a lot of people have been doing that. It's as I said, there's not a lot good for this. People are not going to remember 2020 for a lot of good things, but this is one I think ultimately they will remember as a good thing.
Okay, finally, Keith, Jeff Marek hosts Hockey Central at noon on Sportsnet. Yeah, he has got, and you can appreciate this, a deeper hockey knowledge than most of us. If you ask the guy who played on the fourth line for the Kitchener Rangers in 1978, he'll answer instantly. So he has a skill testing question for you.
Last night, he made a statement in front of tens of millions of Americans that should, by itself, and not just his candidacy for, but his eligibility to be president. Oof, that's good stuff. Oh, you caught me. I'm just doing a little bit of late night reading here while I watch After Hours. Hi, Keith. It's your good buddy Jeff Marek in Stouffville. Really enjoying you on After Hours. And as you know, I'm a big fan of the WHA. I got my Minnesota Fighting Saints shirt on. I always have my Toronto Toros paraphernalia with me. So my question for you on After Hours is this. Who is your favorite player from the old World Hockey Association? And bonus, if the answer is Golden Blades netminder and the pride of Lindsay, Ontario, Joe Junkin.
Oh, all right. Well,
he's giving you the answer.
Yes. I think that, by the way, that summarizes most of Marek's broadcast right there, which is, where's he going with this? Oh, he just gave the whole thing away. I'm sorry. Two things. Please have him never sit like that on camera again. That's number one. And two, he didn't pick that name out of a hat. What he's holding up is, and this was a thing that we went back and forth on. The last year that I did that last political show, one of the things that I did to try to really find another lane to go into mentally was I created a set of World Hockey Association cards, hockey cards for the 1973-74 season. So I had to try to find a photo of every player who played in the WHA in its second and possibly most obscure year. And the best photo I found was that shot at Joe Junkin. And I printed up an extra 30 or 40 of these cards and sent them to Jeff as a gift. And then he turned around and used them against me. But the punchline of punchlines is I saw the New York Golden Blades play. I saw Joe Junkin play, possibly in the game in which that photograph was taken, because there were only about 8 Golden Blades games at Madison Square Garden. And the year before, I saw the New York Raiders play at Madison Square Garden. So I have a little, some WHA chops right here. And I would say if it's not him, I don't think Pete Shire, who was a classmate of mine at Cornell, actually got into WHA games, but he might have. It's one of the two of them, certainly.
Well, listen, Keith, World Hockey Association card project certainly is some serious hockey credentials for you. So there's Keith Olbermann, certified hockey fan, well-known sports and political commentator. He was our guest in After Hours. Thanks again, Keith. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Louie. Good to be with you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you all for watching on YouTube, Facebook, and sportsnet.ca. Join us every Sunday at 9 a.m. ET. Be safe. See you next time.